The first gospel ever written begins with a radical statement, the beginning of the good news of Jesus the Messiah, the Son of God. It's as grand a claim about someone as can possibly be made. But in his time, Jesus was not the only one claiming to be the Son of God.
Meet Dr. Subodh Pandit. One day, a friend approached him with a simple proposition. What would it take to change your religion?
I said, good. I'd change it, but I have to give two reasons. One, to leave my previous religion, and one, to accept the one that he was being talked about.
What followed was a decades-long journey that would turn his world completely upside down. It's the boldest claim about Jesus the Gospels make, and they're not shy about it. His grandest role of all, the Son of God. But before we go digging into that, let's take a step back and ask a simple but important question. What does Son of God even mean? Today, the term Son of God is so ubiquitous that most of us don't stop to question what it even means. But there are many that point to the fact that the term Son of God is not necessarily an indication of divinity.
The first gospel ever written, the Gospel of Mark, was written in Rome to a Roman audience. And to that first century reader, the term Son of God would not have necessarily indicated divinity. This would have been true for Mark's Jewish readers, as the term Son of God was actually sometimes used to refer to Israel. The Romans also had a son of God, Caesar. The Caesar, when Jesus was born, Augustus, famously bore the title Divi Filius, Son of the God. This extended to Jesus' world, as first century Palestine contained multiple temples dedicated to Caesar. But Caesar was of course still a man. One would die and be replaced by another. But in Mark's Gospel, and in the subsequent ones to come, a new player is introduced onto the scene, Jesus of Nazareth, and a new picture of God emerges.
Searching for God today isn't easy. There's so many different faiths and belief systems, and apart from that, a growing number of people who question whether God even exists. But I had a chance to sit down and talk with a man who undertook a search for God in a way I'd never seen before. And to understand his journey, it helps to start with his background. Dr. Subodh Pandit was born and brought up in India.
Not only is it a populous country, it's an extremely diverse country, including religion. We have the largest Hindu population in the world. Probably the second largest Muslim population. We have more Muslims in India than the whole Arabian Peninsula put together.
Wow.
Buddhism, born in India.
That's right.
Sikhism, Jainism, Christianity is supposed to have come to India in its very first generation.
Thomas, correct?
Thomas,
Yeah.
Indeed. So growing up there is kind of a crucible in which there's a huge mixture.
So in that context, shortly after he'd completed medical school, he agreed to a simple request that asked him to try out a different religion.
So I was ready.
Right.
But then there are so many. So which one should I go to? So while I was mulling over this, one of my other friends came back and said, "What are you doing? Are you talking about religion?" It's a waste of time, futile. There is no God.
If there's no God, what's the point of doing this search? But Dr. Pandit figured that if there was a God, and he was going to find it, the only sensible way would be to investigate the people who did believe in a God. He used an illustration.
So, for example, I'm keen about this fact that I must find my daughter back. She's lost. There are 15 people in the room. One says she went east. Another one says she went west. The third one says she went north. And the fourth one says she went south. And the other 11 are totally silent regarding where my daughter went. Who will I begin to question to find my daughter? I will not go to the 11. I will go to the ones who mentioned, and even if they went in all 4 different directions, I will question them.
So he began an examination of the 5 major world religions: Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, and Hinduism. And being a physician, he wanted to make sure his search was governed by certain factors. He chose 4.
Number 1, humility. The attitude of learning. Number 2, honesty. Don't try to gloss over, no white lies. Don't try to push one concept above another. Let the evidence speak for itself. Number 3, calmness. Religion. Religious ideas. They can really lead to all kinds of, enmity and even war. Yeah. The 4th one is respect. Very much lacking.
Yes.
Just because we disagree, we don't like to respect. So these 4.
That's
humility.
The basis of your search moving forward.
That's right. I had to keep to these 4. Humility, honesty, calmness, and respect.
And as he laid out that foundation for his search, he wanted to make sure he settled on the right attitude.
I found, first in my own life, that I have 3 attitudes that I can bring to the table at any given time. The attitude of a skeptic. A skeptic says, I will question everything.
Right.
Not realizing that would question his own question. It will dissolve his own endeavor.
Right.
So it won't work. Okay. The believer swallows everything, but then he has to become arbitrary in what he chooses to keep and what he chooses to discard. That also didn't sound reasonable to me. So what's left is actually an inquiring attitude. Now you can inquire as a believer or a skeptic. So what we have to describe here is an inquiring inquirer. Not a skeptical inquirer, not a believing inquirer, an inquiring inquirer. And when you really accept that, you will have to recognize that you just cannot just do any old search.
Right.
You want to get as close to the truth of the matter as possible.
With those tools in place, what followed was a decades-long odyssey that sent him in every direction. And when he'd reached the end of his journey, he was left stunned, in absolute awe. Dr. Subodh Pandit had his tools in place to begin his search for God, and his journey was founded on a simple question for which he found many potential answers.
If there is a God, what's his name? What is his identity? Because there are so many who are willing to make a big claim. Oh, it is Krishna. Oh, it is Islam, Allah. Oh, it is the way that Gautama Buddha taught us. Oh, it is Jesus. No, it's Yahweh. Well, that was quite a challenge.
Quite a journey you took.
Quite a challenge, because there are so many of them.
Right.
So like I said, over many years, decades actually, of course I was not doing it full time.
Sure.
I was a physician.
And it may have been tempting to just say, hey, maybe they're all right. But that was impossible because they all claimed to be the only way. So his search quickly ran into a conundrum. What do you compare these claims to?
There is no standard. There is no reference point. So I shifted out from the actual doctrines and the claims of their beliefs to another factor. And this is what I found. Every claim, every message came to the human race in the form of a story.
That became his system, comparing these stories to each other through 10 questions to see which one stood apart. The first question was, what are the gaps in the story? Right away, one stood out.
The gospel story of Jesus has the least gaps of any writing.
Really?
In fact, from the historian's point of view, there is no gap. For example, let's take Gautama Buddha's story. His story was written at least 300 to 400 years after him. The Hindus, it goes to hundreds, maybe even a millennia. So compared with that, look at the earliest writing we have of the gospel story of Jesus. It is within just maybe 2 decades, 3 decades, same generation.
Next question. How many manuscripts are there to support the story? Which is an important one because for many ancient writings, we have very few.
Say like Herodotus' History or Cornelius Tacitus' Annals. They are backed by 8 or 20 manuscripts worldwide. This story of Jesus is backed by at least 5,000 Greek manuscripts. And if the total number is taken, it's more than 24,000.
Wow.
See, if we are an inquirer, that should impress us.
Then question 3. How close were the authors to the events described in the story? Again, the gospel authors stood apart.
Compared with any other writing, were not just close to the story, they were part of the story. You see words like I witness,
Right.
I saw, I touched, I handled, we traveled together. You do not find that in any other writing.
Really?
So when you look at these 3, you will immediately recognize that this writing has factors, has evidences that really make it unique.
Dr. Pandit was left stunned at just how historically supported the gospel narrative was. After looking at the writings, his focus shifted to the founders of the religions by examining each religion's own writings and writings friendly to them.
And I put it on the table and I said, let's look and see what happens. So my first question, for example, was, what is the highest claim you make for yourself? Because I was in dead earnest in my search. So here I was looking, as it were, for a coach.
Right.
Will you coach me?
Right. What do you have to offer me? Yeah.
What are your credentials? So give me the highest claim you make for yourself. Nobody is going to force you into anything. Just tell it. I'll accept it. Whatever you say, I will accept. I will not controvert.
Interesting.
Gautama Buddha said he was the super enlightened one. Muhammad said he was the seal of the prophets. The Hindu authors said they were sages. Moses said he was a prophet and a lawgiver. Jesus, Son of God.
No other founder made a claim as bold as that. And this boldness from Jesus came through even more as Dr. Pandit continued with another question. What words did you use?
Jesus used the most peculiar words any of the founders used. He said, I am. When you use the words I am, what you are describing is that there is no difference between your message and you. He is the only founder who claimed to be not the bringer of a message, but to be the message.
The incarnation of the message itself.
He was the message.
Dr. Pandit's journey was headed in a direction he wasn't expecting. Much to his surprise, Jesus was starting to set himself apart.
When we look at all the important roles Jesus fills in the Gospels, we find that there are just so many things that set him apart. In every single role, Jesus acts in ways that are totally unexpected, while simultaneously being its ultimate fulfillment. For instance, as a rabbi, Jesus did not just point to a certain teaching, he claimed to be the way itself. As a healer, he was not interested in simply restoring people's physical disabilities. He forgave their sins and restored them on the deepest level possible. In Jesus' world, this was something only God could do. As a prophet, Jesus did not simply point to Scripture or add to it. He made the outrageous claim of being the very embodiment of it. In every single role, we see this trend. The only way for this to hold up is if there was something truly and fundamentally different about this man, that he was the Son of God. Without this perspective, the entire picture of Jesus we see falls flat. The Gospels compel us to ask ourselves, what if this man really was the Son of God?
As a man of science, Dr. Pandit could clearly see there was a trend emerging in his search.
So at this point, when I looked at my own search, everything was pushed the way of Jesus and the story. Didn't really impress me, my own search at that point. I said, no, what if I'm doing it like this?
Right.
Nah. So as I looked specifically for studies in which he would not come out first.
He chose 3: circumstances at birth, length of mission, and circumstances at death. And he was right. Jesus did not come out first, but he still set himself apart.
Guess where he comes out? Absolutely last. Look at his birth story. Poverty-stricken, he was born among animals. And not only that, the record states that he was conceived out of wedlock. Now, in today's world, you just pass it by.
Right.
But not in ultra-conservative Palestine. First century Palestine? No, sir. That was a stain, a moral stain on the family and on the individual. That is his birth. The only founder to be born like that. Everyone else had a normal and actually an honorable birth. Hey? Dishonorable birth. The number of years? Gautama Buddha, 45 years. Muhammad, 23 years. Moses, 40 years. The Hindu sages, generations. Jesus, 3.5. It's a stark difference. So naturally you ask why? And the question, really, the answer is quite pathetic. It is only 3.5 years, not because he had an accident or died. He was booted out of his community and killed. So how's that for a record? Last. Circumstances of death. All the founders had honorable deaths. People praised them. Look at the way he died. Pinned to an instrument of torture.
Not a glamorous picture. And when you look closer at his death, it gets even less flattering.
Look, here's what I found. He was sentenced to death by the highest religious authority of his day, the Sanhedrin. By the highest civil and judicial authority of his day, Rome. And if you look carefully, in the Jewish Torah, it says that anybody who is hanged, and crucifixion is a form of hanging, anybody who is hanged is under the curse of God. So he was condemned by the highest authority imaginable to the Jewish mind, Jehovah God himself. How is that for an ending? So when you look at that, I was stunned. Not that I didn't know it before, but I was doing a search. And in that search, I was so stunned that I said, how is it that we have Christianity today then, if this is the ending of our life?
Jesus made radical claims that he was the Son of God, that he was the way itself, that seeing him was seeing God. But when you look at his birth, his life, and his death, what kind of picture is that?
In these 3 stages of Jesus' life, his birth, his mission, and his death, the Gospels portray Jesus as a king. But if we look at this through the prism of Jesus also being the Son of God, a remarkably different picture of God emerges. Through his lowly birth, humble service, and shameful death, we see a God willing to endure the absolute worst that this world has to offer in order to find us, reveal himself to us, and connect with us like never before. In fact, it is at his death that the Gospels make their most dramatic claim about the true nature of this Son of God. The scene takes place in the temple, this most sacred space believed to contain the very presence of God. Right at Jesus' death, the temple curtain, which separated God from man, is torn apart from top to bottom. In this dramatic action, the Gospels make what is perhaps their boldest claim. that God is no longer confined behind the barriers of sacred spaces. Instead, if you truly wish to see God, look upon this man, dead on a cross. In the pages of the Gospels, we see a man who reveals the face of God. Through Jesus, we hear God's voice. We see what He is like through His actions. We see how He treated people, how He felt about people, what He was willing to sacrifice for people.
Dr. Pandit had one question left in his search. What happened to the founder after they died? And in the answer to that question, Jesus sets himself apart most radically.
And there you find that He is the only founder who says, I'm still around. All the others are gone and somebody else took over. But He says, no, I am still in charge because I may have died, but I rose up again.
At that point, I had to ask him, how does something like resurrecting from the dead hold up to a rational, inquiring inquirer?
First, we take our 4 factors that govern our search. And the second of it is honesty. When you look at the story, you have to be honest and say it's not believable.
Yeah,
It simply is not believable.
sure.
So how do you shift from an unbelievable story to accepting it as even possibly believable? Now we do it actually quite often, and that was the appeal that I made to myself.
What he's saying is, there are plenty of things in the world that are impossible to accept on claim alone, yet we know they're true. And the reason we know they're true is because someone saw it and corroborated it.
Yeah, that is the key. So here's number 1. Where is it written? It is written in the best attested historical piece of literature. So if I really want to discard it, I must give a good historical reason to discard it, not an opinion.
Right.
So here's the question of being unbelievable. We accept it as unbelievable. So to discard it, I found I could not.
And the problem was that there was no other alternative story in the writings from the same era. Instead, the writings of that era only further the claim.
We have in the writings a statement that said 500 people saw Jesus after He rose up from the dead. 500 people at one time.
Even so, he tried to find another potential story that could explain everything, but found none.
Then when you go to the other side in which you ask, well, is there anything that would compel us in that direction? And there is. For example, there is no explanation for the change of the disciples who were cowering in an upper room one day and within a few weeks stood before thousands in Jerusalem who were thirsting for their deaths, and all of them went to their deaths. Holding on to this. How do you explain that? You cannot explain that with an everyday story.
Jesus' disciples had all abandoned him at his death, and yet later followed him with an unbelievable fervor to their very deaths. Only a colossal event could explain that kind of transformation. And they all had the same story.
That which we have seen, which we have heard, which our hands have handled, that is what we are writing to you. Now, what is seeing, hearing, and handling? Empirical evidence, not opinion. And an eyewitness who actually dies for what he sees, we have to acknowledge as solid, strong evidence.
In his search, the more he investigated this once unbelievable claim, the more it became impossible to dismiss.
I did it myself, and I am compelled by the evidence that you cannot find another story to replace that and yet have all the facts around it still intact.
After decades of rigorous examination, a heavy realization was beginning to emerge. Jesus was who he claimed to be. This man really was the Son of God.
All the early Christian writings described that Jesus was raised from the dead, not that he resurrected himself. This is extremely important for us to remember. God resurrected Jesus. In that tomb, Jesus was fully dead, and God brought him back. To everyone Jesus appeared to afterwards, this was the ultimate vindication from God himself that Jesus truly was everything he claimed to be. He was not a blasphemer and a liar. If he had died and stayed dead, he could not have been all those things he claimed to be. He would have just been a man. That is why the resurrection of Jesus is so important. God was communicating a message that would not just change the lives of Jesus' first followers, but of every generation that would encounter him in the Gospels ever since.
Dr. Pandit's search had revealed a picture of Jesus and of God that was completely without equal.
Now you can see in my search, when we finished all these 10, now when I hear people saying he was an exceptional rabbi, what do you think I would say? Of course. He was a real top-notch prophet. I'll say yes. He was a healer. Of course. He was a priest. Yes. He was the Messiah. Yes, sir. There is enough evidence for an inquirer to say it makes good sense. It is not just a figment of somebody's imagination.
The evidence and the picture of Jesus was compelling. But then I asked, what did that mean to you personally?
That comes to really the crux of everything. No matter what the story is, what has that got to do with me? What has that got to do with the human race?
Right.
What is he telling us that he offers that is different from the others?
Firstly, in Jesus we see a completely different picture of God, a God in search of people.
Looking for the human race. There's no other God who did that. You look for him. He said, no, I will come and look for you. And not only that, once he found you, he could have said, all right, here are the rules. Do it and I'll say, I will give you the kudos and you can get to heaven. No. He found us and he himself paved the way for humanity to reach its highest ideal. Nobody from such heights went to such depths to offer so much to so many.
In looking at this radical picture of God we see on the cross, we also see a dramatic view of God's justice and his mercy.
So I say, if justice is a cannon that will fire, mercy cannot stop the firing, but it can turn the cannon the other way. But then you have upheld justice.
Right.
So when you look at this picture, this is the only picture in the world where God said, I will hold on to my justice. You break it, you die. I will fire the cannon. And then he turned the cannon on to himself.
Wow. What kind of God upholds his own law by bringing the punishment onto himself?
I will hold on to my justice.
After decades of search, Dr. Subodh Pandit found himself absolutely gripped by the picture of God he saw in Jesus.
This is what I found, Sergio, in my search. And the inquirer in me stands absolutely amazed and awed. Jesus is unique in every sense of that word.
The Gospels present a picture of a man completely without equal. And as was the case with Dr. Pandit and his journey, the more we examine this portrait, the more we are left in awe by what we find on these pages.
But the Gospels also take it one step further. They describe him as someone who's risen, who still lives. And if that's true, he's no longer contained to just the pages of these Gospels. Anyone can experience him, connect with him, and be forever changed by him.
It's a bold claim, yes. But the alternative is even more bizarre. That this wondrous, complex, incredible, and totally unexpected portrait of this man that is completely without equal in all of human history is simply just the invention of a bunch of semi-educated fishermen. For what ulterior motive? We cannot know, because every single one of them was willing to die for this belief.
So who was this man? The answer to that question brings us full circle to the very first claim the Gospels make. He was the Son of God. And accepting that claim changes your life forever. But that's what it is, a claim. What we do with that, the Gospels leave to us.
Jesus launched his revolution 2,000 years ago.
But no one said it's over.